we're talking about the history and purpose of political parties. So, the first thing that we have to understand about political parties is that they are not in the Constitution. That's right. Political parties have nothing to do with the Constitution at all. I mean, they exist. Different people were aware that they would probably happen, but they are not actually a part of the Constitution. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have something to do with the government, but they are technically outside of the national government, which means that political parties are really private organizations. People control the political parties. And that's kind of how it works. So the question is, why not just allow the people to vote directly for the government? And by the way, technically, there are no laws or rules in the country that say that that can't be how it happens. But ever since we created political parties in the second presidential election, they have been a permanent fixture of our government. So let's talk about why they exist. So, you have people who are candidates, people who want to vote, who want you to vote for them, like Barack Obama or Abraham Lincoln, vampire slayer, or, the Sith Lord Emperor Palpatine. Maybe all of these guys want you to vote for them. And so if you were a voter and you were trying to make an informed decision about what they what would make them good for a particular office, you would have to literally look at them on every issue that matters to you and make individual decisions, and then you'd have to add up all of those votes and try to figure out which one is the best. And that's going to take a lot of time. And so what we have done to kind of simplify the process is to create political parties. And those political parties have stated what we call platforms. They're basically what each party stands for. And they stand for those on all of the issues, or at least a lot of the ones that matter to them. And so what you can do then is you can figure out which political party you line up with more. It's highly unlikely that you completely line up with any political party, but you kind of prioritize what's important to you. You find the party that matches you, and then you go ahead and associate with that party. And then when candidates want to run for a particular office, they try to get the candidates that best fit their their platform. And so again, it might not be perfect, but at least it's a process that kind of weeds everything out. And so what you end up with then is those endorsements from those political parties. And what that ends up doing is it ends up making it easier for you to know which candidate you maybe line up with better. Now, that doesn't mean that you're always going to do that. That doesn't even mean that you should not do your homework, because maybe the three most important issues to you, and the reason why, let's say you're a Democrat or a Republican, maybe the nominee that year doesn't line up on two of those three issues, and that's a deal breaker for you. And so you still get to make up your own mind about how you would do that. There are a lot of political parties in the American political process right now. We tend to focus only on Republicans and Democrats, but there are far more than that. And so I want to talk just briefly about the history of political parties, because it has not always been Republican and Democrat. And so what we have are these things called critical realignment or critical alignment elections. And basically what I want you to understand is that a Republican in 1850 did not think the way that Republicans think today. As a matter of fact, if you're looking at things like Abraham Lincoln and you feel like you're a Republican and Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and therefore you must agree with him, That might not be true because there have been these critical realignment elections. So the first one happens right after John Adams and Thomas Jefferson so George Washington is the first president. Everybody votes for him because he's George Washington. But then we get the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist Party, and eventually the Anti-Federalists call themselves the Democrat slash Republican Party, and that's our first realignment, and the Democrat Republicans win after John Adams wins one term, and you can see here by the green that they kind of dominate all of the elections. Our next critical alignment is when the Democrat-Republican Party itself, the Green Party here, you can see to the left of the second star, splits in half. And so the Thomas Jefferson Party splits into the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. And the Democrats win. Andrew Jackson becomes the president of that party. But then we get the Whigs that kind of pop up and replace the Republicans for a while. And our next alignment election is when Lincoln kind of brings the Republican Party back. And you can see that in that election, there's actually 4 different political parties that all get votes for president. And this is obviously right before the Civil War, states' rights and other things like that, really important issues. The next one is the beginning of the progressive era. This is when the national government, really starts to take over for the state governments. That's what that election is basically like. The big issue there becomes that issue. And then we have the FDR election during the Great Depression. We have when the New South, they call it. This is basically after segregation, when the southern states switch. And so, prior to about 1960, it was very rare for a southern state to vote for a Republican president. Since 1968, they've pretty much always voted for Republican presidents. And so we get these critical alignment elections fairly often. And what that means is that if you're looking past a star, that the policy of that political party is probably different on one side of the star than the other. And so you can see that these parties have shifted their views quite a bit. They kind of update regularly. I also want you to notice that they are basically the same distance apart, which means that we should have probably had one about right here. And so there's a strong likelihood that even the Republican parties from when you were born and the Democrat Party from when you were born, historians are probably going to talk about those parties as very different from the parties now. You think about maybe the way that Donald Trump and Barack Obama have both changed those parties, the way that they run, the growing socialist movement, and AOC and Bernie Sanders and the changes that those have made in the Democrat Party. And I think that we're going to see that those two political parties, the Democrat and the Republican parties of our current time, are very different from the ones that existed before 2008. And so every 20, 30, 40 years tops, the political parties pretty much shift what they think. That doesn't automatically mean that they change completely. It just means that our political process is evolving and changing over time, and it's happening in these political parties that are technically a part of but outside of our government.